The assembly point was Hvalfjordur, Iceland, a sheltered bay carved by volcanic activity and shadowed by perpetual gray weather. It was late June 1942. The concentration of material gathered there, officially designated Convoy PQ-17, represented an immense political and strategic commitment, the largest and most valuable directed toward the Soviet Union's northern ports since the inception of the Arctic convoys. The fleet consisted of 35 merchant vessels, predominantly American in registration, carrying a staggering inventory: 297 combat aircraft, including Hurricanes and Spitfires, 594 heavy and medium tanks, mostly M3 Lees and M4 Shermans, 4,246 trucks and jeeps, and over 156,000 tons of general cargo, including specialized munitions and high-grade aviation fuel. Subsequent archival analysis estimated the contemporary valuation of this cargo at approximately $700 million, making its safe passage an economic as well as a military imperative critical to the survival of the Eastern Front. The overall command structure was complex and inherently flawed, mirroring the conflicting priorities of the Allied nations involved. Commodore J.C.K. Dowding, aboard his merchant vessel, held the nominal command of the convoy's formation and conduct, adhering to the standard Royal Navy procedure for merchant fleets. His authority, however, was strictly navigational and ceremonial. The true responsibility for protection rested with the naval escort forces, divided into two distinct components. The close escort was commanded by Commander J. E. Broome, RN, aboard the minesweeper HMS Pallas. This force comprised 6 destroyers, 4 corvettes, 3 minesweepers, and 2 anti-aircraft vessels. Their mission was to act as an immediate screen against U-boat and aerial threats. While tactically proficient, this force was insufficient to engage any heavy surface unit. The heavy deterrent, the 1st Cruiser Force, Force A, was commanded by Rear Admiral L. H. K. Hamilton, aboard the cruiser HMS London. This force included 3 heavy cruisers, London, Norfolk, Wichita, and the American heavy cruiser USS Wichita, accompanied by 4 destroyers. Their objective was singular: to intervene should the German heavy surface units attempt to sortie. Crucially, the rules of engagement dictated that this cruiser force must remain within mutual support range of the convoy, but must not become irrevocably committed to an engagement that might compromise their ultimate survival, a mandate reflecting the Admiralty's extreme sensitivity regarding the loss of capital ships. The atmosphere among the command staff, both at Hvalfjordur and, more significantly, in the Admiralty War Room in London, was dominated by controlled anxiety. The strategic challenge was defined entirely by the presence of the German battle squadron based in the deep fjords of northern Norway. This battle group included the Kriegsmarine's single most potent surface threat, the battleship Tirpitz. The Tirpitz, known by the British press as the Beast, was a technological and psychological weapon. Its presence alone had the power to dictate the movements of entire Allied fleets. It was escorted by the heavy cruiser Admiral Hipper and the pocket battleship Lutzow, formerly Deutschland, along with a screen of destroyers. The combined force, codenamed Operation Rosselsprung, Operation Knight's Move, was capable of annihilating any existing Allied escort force in the Arctic theater. The fear in the Admiralty was rational. Should the Tirpitz engage the convoy, Force A would be incapable of stopping it without suffering unacceptable losses. The political fallout of losing a significant portion of the Allied war material, alongside the sinking of multiple heavy cruisers, was deemed by the First Sea Lord, Admiral Sir Dudley Pound, to be potentially catastrophic to the Allied commitment to the Soviet Union. The operational structure of Convoy PQ-17 was thus a calculated gamble, designed to deter the Tirpitz by mere suggestion of superior numbers, a bluff that rested entirely on the assumption that the German command would not commit their capital ships to action without absolute certainty of victory. This foundational anxiety, rooted in the intelligence of the German fleet's potential movement, would become the ultimate undoing of the convoy. Convoy PQ-17 departed Hvalfjordur on June 27, 1942, entering immediately into a theater of relentless environmental hostility. The 2,500-mile transit route required navigating the notorious gauntlet of the Norwegian Sea, an expanse characterized by high seas, sub-zero temperatures, and, most critically, the oppressive reality of the perpetual Arctic daylight during the summer months. This phenomenon, the midnight sun, eliminated the protective cover of night, rendering the convoy visible to German aerial reconnaissance for 24 hours a day. The formation was impressive but vulnerable. The 35 merchant ships adopted a rigid, 9-column formation, spanning a nautical mile across, shepherded by the close escort. The escort commander, Commander Broom, understood that his primary defense was the mere density of his formation, forcing U-boats to risk close-quarters attacks and presenting a difficult target for the Luftwaffe. Initial enemy contact was established within 48 hours of departure. On June 29th, the convoy was identified by a long-range German reconnaissance aircraft, a Focke-Wulf WW2 Condor, operating out of northern Norway. This sighting was immediately reported to Kriegsmarine Command, initiating the full alert for Operation Rosselsprung. The psychological impact of this first sighting was profound. Every man aboard the merchant ships now understood that their location was known and that the countdown to attack had officially begun. The first significant engagement occurred on July 1st. A pack of 6 U-boats, alerted by the Condor's sighting, made a coordinated approach under the cover of a dense patch of fog. The close escort reacted with immediate, aggressive depth charge maneuvers. The effectiveness of the escort was momentarily validated when the American merchant vessel, the SS Richard K. Johnson, detected a U-boat passing directly under its hull and relayed the precise hydrophone contact to the destroyer HMS Ashanti. The Ashanti, in a sustained 4-hour attack, successfully drove off the immediate wolf pack without loss to the convoy. However, the close escort's tactical success was mitigated by a critical logistical failure. The British rescue ship, HMS Zamalek, was forced to break formation to recover the sole survivor of a recently sunk Allied tanker, forcing the convoy to slow and briefly disrupt its protective anti-submarine screen. This momentary vulnerability was instantly exploited. On the afternoon of July 2nd, the convoy suffered its first loss. A concentrated attack by Luftwaffe Heinkel He-111 bombers, operating at low altitude, targeted the rear of the formation. The merchant ship SS Christopher Newport, carrying valuable ammunition and explosives, sustained a direct hit to its bridge. The resulting explosion was catastrophic and instantaneous, vaporizing the ship and leaving no survivors. The destruction served as a stark, immediate demonstration of the severity of the operational theater. The loss of a single vessel, while tragic, also confirmed the terrifying capability of the German air and sea assets that were now actively tracking the fleet. In the Admiralty War Room in London, the casualty was registered with alarm. The constant flow of intelligence from Bletchley Park regarding the Tirpitz was already fueling extreme caution. The loss of the Christopher Newport, combined with continuous German reconnaissance reports, reinforced the perception that the convoy was not merely being shadowed, but was being funneled into a pre-established Arctic trap. The question in London was no longer if the Tirpitz would sail, but when the massive German trap would close, a decision point that would ultimately fall upon the shoulders of Admiral Pound. The psychological and strategic stress exerted upon convoy PQ-17 was derived almost entirely from a single, stationary entity, the battleship Tirpitz. Anchored deep within the massive, intricate fjord system of Kofjord, northern Norway, the vessel represented an unparalleled concentration of firepower. Its presence was not merely a military threat, it was a ghost that haunted every operational decision made by the Admiralty. The British had failed multiple times to destroy it, including the famous Operation Source, the midget submarine attack, reinforcing the belief that the Tirpitz was effectively untouchable and waiting for a decisive moment. The Admiralty's overriding directive, the safety of Allied capital ships above all else, was a direct consequence of this ghost. The Tirpitz was the only German vessel capable of sinking multiple Allied heavy cruisers in a single engagement. If the first cruiser force, Force A, were to suffer catastrophic losses, the entire strategic balance in the North Atlantic would shift, leaving the vital sea lanes connecting Britain and North America dangerously exposed. This strategic paranoia was deeply felt by Rear Admiral Hamilton, commander of Force A, aboard the HMS London. He knew his cruisers were meant to act only as a deterrent, not as a sacrificial combat force. His command was constrained by the knowledge that his force had a critical line of engagement that, if crossed, would commit him to a duel he could not win without incurring the very losses the Admiralty was desperate to avoid. Every hour the convoy progressed eastward, Force A was drawn closer to the Tirpitz's operational reach, tightening the noose. Meanwhile, aboard the merchant ships, the tension manifested differently. Captain Andrew Wigg, master of the American Liberty ship SS Sutton, embodied the resilient, insubordinate spirit of the merchant marine. Wigg's ship, loaded with 30P-39 Airacobra fighters and specialized radar equipment, was vital cargo. Wigg operated under a cynical understanding of the official naval protection. They were the bait, not the priority. Wigg, a veteran of the Atlantic convoys, had established a communication relay with 5 other American merchant captains in his column. These men shared his skepticism regarding the Admiralty's resolve. Their philosophy was pragmatic. The moment the professional Navy decided the risk was too high, the merchant marine would be left to its own devices. They were prepared to violate official naval orders if necessary to deliver the cargo. This unwritten pact, the decision to prioritize the mission over the safety doctrine, formed a critical counter-narrative to the eventual official disaster. On the evening of July 3rd, the convoy was positioned near the ice edge, approximately 250 miles from the Tirpitz's location. Intelligence intercepts, decrypted with terrifying speed by Bletchley Park, indicated heavy German radio traffic consistent with a major fleet mobilization. The message was succinct and chilling. Operation Rosselsprung was in its final preparatory phase. This information flowed directly to Admiral Pound in the Admiralty War Room, confirming his deepest fear. The Ghost was finally preparing to sail. Pound faced the quintessential tactical dilemma: risk the total annihilation of the convoy and the heavy cruiser force, or implement a drastic, preemptive measure to minimize losses, regardless of the cost to the mission. The decision to act was not based on the Tirpitz's proven combat status, but on the fear of its potential, a fear that was now reaching its operational apex in London, while, unseen, Captain Wigg and his colleagues prepared to defy whatever orders might come next. The Admiralty War Room, located deep beneath Whitehall, functioned as the cold, intellectual core of the disaster. On the morning of July 4, 1942, the atmosphere was one of acute, contained hysteria. Admiral Sir Dudley Pound, First Sea Lord, a man renowned for both brilliant strategy and crippling caution, was locked in an operational review dominated by intelligence derived from the highest priority intercepts supplied by Bletchley Park's cryptanalysts. The decryption of the German naval signals confirmed with high certainty that Operation Rosselsprung was underway. The Tirpitz, the heavy cruiser Admiral Hipper, and the pocket battleship Lutzow, supported by 6 destroyers, had begun their initial movement out of the Norwegian fjords. Pound's command philosophy was governed by the bitter lessons of previous naval encounters, specifically the loss of the HMS Hood and the near destruction of the carrier fleet in the Mediterranean. His paramount concern was the preservation of the capital ships, the heavy cruisers of Force A, over the mere survival of the merchant convoy. He calculated that if Force A engaged the Tirpitz battle group, it would be overwhelmed, sacrificing both the cruisers and the convoy. The decision was not about saving the convoy, but minimizing the strategic damage of its inevitable destruction. At 9 o'clock hours, Pound ordered the first, deeply flawed message to be sent. This message was directed not at the convoy itself, but to Rear Admiral Hamilton commanding Force A. Admiralty TO Force A, Priority 1. Immediate in view of threat by Tirpitz and Hipper. Cruiser Force is TO, withdraw westward. Disengage convoy immediate. The receipt of this signal aboard the HMS London was met with a mixture of disbelief and professional resignation by Admiral Hamilton. The order stripped the convoy of its only effective defense against the German capital ships, effectively removing the bluff that had protected them thus far. Hamilton, bound by the rigid chain of command, signaled his compliance. The withdrawal of Force A commenced immediately, turning the heavy cruisers westward and away from the convoy they were meant to protect. This action, witnessed by the ships of the close escort, was strategically catastrophic. The mere presence of the cruisers was the magnetic deterrent holding the German surface fleet in check. Their absence created a psychological vacuum, signaling to the German command that the threat of counter-engagement had been removed. More critically, the close escort, commanded by Commander Broom, was kept unaware of the intelligence driving the order. Broom knew only that his heavy protection had deserted them. He was left with an undergunned force and 34 merchant vessels, knowing that the Tirpitz was now free to roam. The close escort maintained its position, adhering to the final, standing order to protect the merchant ships, but the integrity of the naval formation was already fundamentally compromised. The initial act of strategic retreat had been executed, leaving the convoy in a state of suspended doom, fully exposed to the aerial and subsurface threats that were already massing around them. This first message was not the execution order, but the meticulous preparation of the sacrificial lamb. The turning point, the single most disastrous decision in the history of the Arctic convoys, was finalized at 21:11 hours on July 4th. Admiral Pound, under the continuous pressure of updated, high-priority intelligence intercepts from Bletchley Park, became convinced that the Tirpitz and its accompanying battle group were executing a coordinated pincer movement aimed directly at the now unprotected convoy. The intercepts, while confirming the German sortie, were inherently incomplete and subject to interpretative error regarding the German fleet's precise objective and speed. Pound's caution had metastasized into absolute panic. His rationale was brutally simple. If the ships remained together, they would present a single, concentrated target for the Tirpitz upon its arrival, resulting in a total loss. If they were scattered, some might evade the German fleet, using the confusion of the ice edge and the distance to the port of Archangel to escape. Pound dictated 3 terse messages in rapid succession, bypassing all operational review committees and sending them directly to the remaining escort forces. The third message was the most concise and chilling, most immediate. Convoy is TO disperse and proceed to Russian ports. Repeat, disperse and proceed to Russian ports. This order was received by Commander Broom aboard the minesweeper HMS Palace with stunned disbelief. It was an unprecedented act of naval abandonment, a complete reversal of millennia of maritime tradition that dictated the escort must stay with the protected fleet. Broom attempted to query the order, sending a signal back requesting confirmation of the extreme instruction. The Admiralty's reply was immediate and unequivocal. Immediate. Convoy is TO scatter. Repeat, scatter. The second, confirming message left no room for interpretation. Broom, his face a mask of duty warring with revulsion, ordered the close escort to execute the withdrawal. The 6 destroyers, for corvettes, and 3 minesweepers of the close escort abruptly reversed course, their speed creating white wakes of sudden desertion. Their obligation to the merchant ships was instantaneously severed. The close escort departed westward to regroup with Force A, leaving the 34 merchant vessels isolated, immobile in the formation, and suddenly defenseless. The psychological impact on the merchant fleet was devastating. Aboard the SS Sutton, Captain Andrew Wigg watched the last destroyer's stern disappear into the Arctic gloom. The withdrawal of the professional Navy confirmed his deepest cynicism. The mission had been abandoned. The merchant ships were now 34 independent targets, strung out over thousands of square miles of hostile ocean. The signal for dispersal, however, provided an unexpected loophole for the defiant captains. An order to disperse was not an order to surrender. Wigg immediately used the internal radio channel he had established to contact his 5 allied captains. His message was brief, delivered in a clipped, non-regulation tone. Sutton TO, all contacts. Admiralty has shown ITS hand. We are not scattering. We are proceeding east. Stick to your columns. We run the gauntlet together. This act of direct, high-stakes insubordination, the refusal to obey the Admiralty's command to scatter, formed the nucleus of the subsequent counteraction. As the remaining ships slowly began to turn into the Arctic mist, the fleet divided. The majority, adhering to the final order, turned south toward the coast, seeking to evade the Tirpitz independently. But 6 ships, following the unwritten law of the merchant marine, turned east toward the ice edge and the absolute unknown, defying the official abandonment to pursue their mission. The betrayal was complete, but so too was the genesis of the heroic refusal. The dispersal order created immediate, tactical chaos. The 34 merchant ships were transformed from a dense, protected naval formation into 34 solitary targets, scattered across a 400-square-mile area of the Norwegian Sea. The effect was precisely the opposite of what Admiral Pound had intended. The ships were easier to locate, easier to target, and incapable of providing mutual defense. The Arctic trap had sprung. The Kriegsmarine and the Luftwaffe, having tracked the convoy for days, responded to the confusion with ruthless efficiency. The German command, observing the immediate dissolution of the escort screen via air reconnaissance, correctly inferred that the convoy was now defenseless. Operation Rosselsprung was momentarily suspended, as the immense firepower of the Tirpitz was deemed unnecessary for a massacre that could be executed by light forces. The U-boats and the Luftwaffe were given the immediate order for saturation attack. The first major wave of devastation struck within 90 minutes of the dispersal order. The U-boat U-255, commanded by Lieutenant Commander Reinhard Ricci, quickly located a string of 4 southbound merchant vessels struggling to maintain separate courses. Ricci's approach was clinical, taking advantage of the lack of escort presence and the ship's desperate, uncoordinated zigzag maneuvers. At 2300 hours, the American merchant vessel SS Fairfield City was struck by 2 torpedoes. The ship, loaded with explosives, disintegrated instantly, marking the swift, brutal end for the majority of her crew. 10 minutes later, the British ship SS Panama was struck and sank within 7 minutes, the frigid water ensuring minimal survival time for those who made it to the lifeboats. The air attacks were equally devastating. The Luftflotte 5 launched a coordinated strike involving 43 Heinkel He-111 and Junkers Ju-88 bombers. These aircraft, operating under the perpetual daylight, selected ships that were isolated or poorly concealed by cloud cover. The SS Washington, a large tanker, was targeted by 3 Heinkels in quick succession. The resulting fire was immense, turning the ship into a towering pyre that served as a grim navigational beacon for the surrounding U-boats. The psychological horror of the burning tanker confirmed the depth of the betrayal to any crew who witnessed it. Meanwhile, Captain Wigg's small contingent of 6 ships, the heroic refusal, had turned hard east, hugging the edge of the permanent ice floes. This maneuver was reckless but provided marginal cover. The ice edge was seldom patrolled by U-boats due to the navigational hazards, and the close proximity to the floating ice made it difficult for the bombers to execute low-altitude runs. Wigg enforced a strict, non-regulation radio silence, relying on visual signaling to maintain the formation's integrity. He understood that speed and invisibility were now the only currency of survival. However, the German net was closing. By dawn on July 5th, 8 merchant ships had been confirmed sunk. The German High Command, intoxicated by the success of the dispersal and the speed of the destruction, was now calculating the optimal moment to unleash the Tirpitz battle group for the final annihilation. The convoy had been abandoned to death, and the immediate consequence was a systematic, calculated massacre. The twist of the narrative was fully engaged. The enemy's main weapon had yet to fire, and yet, the destruction was already near total, inflicted by the supporting cast upon a target rendered uniquely vulnerable by its own command structure. Captain Andrew Wigg's act of insubordination, the calculated refusal to scatter the SS Sutton and his 5 Allied merchant ships, was founded on a single principle: mutual defense, however minimal. His flotilla of 6 vessels moved eastward, utilizing the strategic cover of the permanent ice pack, a geological boundary that afforded relative safety from the U-boats, which feared the unpredictable navigation near the drifting floes. This small, improvised formation included the Norwegian tanker Ganga and the British cargo vessel Ocean Freedom, carrying vitally needed railway rolling stock. The discipline maintained aboard these 6 ships stood in stark contrast to the panic gripping the dispersed elements of the convoy to the south. Wigg enforced total radio silence, relying on antiquated but effective signal lamps and flags to maintain distance and course. The perpetual Arctic daylight was a double-edged sword. It made concealment impossible, but it also aided in the visual monitoring of the formation, preventing ships from losing contact in the overwhelming expanse. The primary objective of this eastern course was to reach the Novaya Zemlya archipelago, a desolate Russian territory where, Wig hoped, the combination of Soviet territorial waters and extreme northerly latitude would provide a temporary sanctuary from the concentrated German air and U-boat assaults. Progress, however, was agonizingly slow. The formation's average speed was reduced to 8 knots due to the necessity of constant course adjustments to avoid collision with icebergs and growlers, which also rendered consistent zigzagging against U-boat attack impossible. The strain on the crews was immense. Having witnessed the sudden desertion of the naval escorts and hearing the sporadic, chilling reports of sinkings via short-range radio chatter from the scattered ships, morale was maintained only by the sheer force of Wig's leadership and the clear, immediate goal of reaching the ice edge. Each captain knew the six-ship formation was a highly visible target. Their survival rested entirely on the belief that the German High Command was preoccupied with the easier targets scattered closer to the Norwegian coast. This tactical decision paid an initial dividend. While the U-boats were systematically sinking the ships that had obeyed the dispersal order, for more ships were lost in the first 24 hours of scattering. Wig's eastern movement seemed, temporarily, to confuse the German targeting. The concentration of German assets remained focused on the area where the close escort had departed, operating under the assumption that the main body of the convoy had fragmented and headed toward the Icelandic or Shetland Islands. Wig and his 5 comrades represented an anomaly, a tiny, defiant splinter group that, by sheer audacious positioning, had momentarily slipped outside the operational perimeter of the enemy's immediate hunt. Their isolation, which should have guaranteed their demise, had unexpectedly become their greatest, albeit temporary, defense. The true twist in the catastrophe, the element that transitioned the event from military disaster to operational tragedy, occurred simultaneously with the massacres at sea. The German battle group, led by the Tirpitz, the Hipper, and the Lutzow, was proceeding north from its hiding place in Altifjord, prepared to intercept the convoy based on the intelligence confirming the British escort withdrawal. The sheer firepower arrayed represented certain doom for any remaining merchant vessel. However, the command structure governing Operation Rosselsprung was predicated on absolute intelligence certainty. Grand Admiral Erich Raeder, Commander-in-Chief of the Kriegsmarine, had issued a strict mandate. The Tirpitz was not to be hazarded unless the German High Command was absolutely certain that British heavy naval units, particularly aircraft carriers or powerful battleships like HMS King George V, were not lurking nearby, prepared to ambush the German fleet. This strategic paralysis, the German equivalent of Pound's own caution, was the central suspense element. At 4:30 hours on July 5th, a critical intelligence failure occurred. A German long-range reconnaissance aircraft incorrectly reported that it had sighted a formation of British cruisers and a possible aircraft carrier operating well to the west of the scattered convoy. The report was erroneous, likely a misidentification of the retreating Force A, Admiral Hamilton's group, coupled with the fear of carrier presence that pervaded German naval doctrine. Upon receiving this intelligence, Admiral Raeder, fearful of risking the Tirpitz in a surprise engagement with a superior force, made a decision that fundamentally altered the outcome of the battle, though not the fate of the convoy. At 8 o'clock hours, he issued the order to the Tirpitz battle group, immediate recall to base. The magnificent German fleet, which had sailed to execute the final, devastating coup de grace, was ordered to abort the mission and retreat back into the safety of the fjords. The Tirpitz, the monster whose theoretical existence had terrified Admiral Pound into issuing the dispersal order, was now heading home. This fact remained entirely unknown to the Allies. Admiral Pound in London continued to operate under the firm conviction that the Tirpitz was hunting the remnants of PQ-17. The close escort was still steaming westward, attempting to unite with the heavy cruisers, all believing they had escaped an imminent surface engagement. The immense tragedy, the central mystery cliffhanger, was thus solidified. The sacrifice of convoy PQ-17 was unnecessary. The 24 ships that would ultimately be lost were sunk not by the superior force they feared, but by the secondary threats, U-boats and aircraft, that the close escort could have, and indeed had been, effectively defending against. The abandonment had been enacted against a phantom threat that was, at that very moment, retreating from the battlefield. The full consequences of Pound's operational paranoia were only beginning to manifest as the truth of the German recall remained locked within the intelligence vacuum. The period between July 5th and July 8th was characterized by a systematic, piecemeal annihilation of the isolated merchant vessels. The lack of a concentrated target allowed the German U-boat commanders and Luftwaffe pilots to operate with impunity, conducting coordinated attacks against single, defenseless ships. This phase of the tragedy was marked by extreme operational efficiency by the German forces and agonizing suspense for the Allied survivors. The dispersed ships, attempting to navigate independently toward the Soviet ports of Archangel or Murmansk, were forced to contend with both the enemy and the brutal reality of their fuel and munition supplies. Ships attempting to save fuel by reducing speed became easy targets. Those that maintained high speed quickly depleted their reserves. The lack of coordinated anti-aircraft cover meant that virtually every air attack resulted in a sinking. Notable losses during this period included the American ship SS Honomu, which put up a valiant, but ultimately futile, defense against three Ju-88 bombers before being crippled and finally sunk by U-255. The British vessel SS Ina, carrying a crucial cargo of high-octane aviation fuel, was tracked by U-376 and destroyed by a single torpedo, the resulting secondary explosions lighting up the Arctic sky for miles. The total loss count rose relentlessly, reaching 17 by the end of July 6th. The suspense was amplified by the sporadic rescue attempts. The abandoned naval escorts, having reunited far to the west, were finally ordered to make limited, calculated forays back toward the disaster area to retrieve survivors, though not to re-engage in active convoy duties. This led to perilous encounters, such as the destroyer HMS La Malouine managing to save 69 men from life rafts, often only moments before the areas were swept by U-boats searching for stranded survivors. Meanwhile, Captain Wigg's small, defiant group continued its slow, painstaking progress along the ice edge. Their greatest suspense now lay in avoiding detection in the sparse landscape. On the evening of July 7th, the SS Sutton sighted a Focke-Wulf Condor in the distance. Wigg immediately ordered the entire formation to steam directly into a patch of dense, low-hanging Arctic fog that often clung to the ice floes. For 4 hours, the 6 ships navigated blind, relying entirely on dead reckoning and the ominous sound of groaning ice, while the German aircraft circled fruitlessly above. By the morning of July 8th, only 10 merchant ships from the original 35 remained afloat, a testament to the comprehensive failure of the Admiralty's command. The survival of Wigg's splinter group now depended on whether the German High Command would conclude its current hunting operation and deploy specific assets to sweep the hostile, ice-clogged eastern sector, a contingency that Wigg calculated was only hours away. The final act of the tragedy was poised to shift from tactical destruction to a definitive, climactic hunt. By July 9, 1942, the search for the remnants of PQ-17 had entered its terminal phase. The German High Command, recognizing the successful systematic destruction of the dispersed ships near the Norwegian coast, shifted its focus eastward. Long-range reconnaissance flights confirmed the existence of a small, defiant group hugging the ice edge, including Captain Wigg's SS Sutton. The success of the heroic refusal had been temporary. Their concealment strategy was now defeated by the relentless Arctic daylight. The pursuit was assigned to a specialized U-boat hunter-killer group and a detachment of long-range Focke-Wulf Condor aircraft, optimized for the high-latitude sweep. This group was commanded by Lieutenant Commander Rolf Morrell, a decorated U-boat ace whose mission was explicitly to prevent any cargo from reaching Archangel, thereby completing the strategic victory. The first contact was brutal. The Norwegian tanker Ganga, having developed engine trouble and falling slightly behind the main group, was sighted by a Condor at 1400 hours. The bomber radioed the position, and U-457 executed an immediate, close-range attack. The Ganga, carrying highly volatile fuel, exploded with such force that Captain Wigg, 6 miles away aboard the Sutton, reported feeling the tremor through the hull plates. The loss of the Ganga was the catalyst for the ultimate decision. WW, realizing that maintaining a formation was now only serving to provide a larger, more easily tracked target, reluctantly issued the final, inevitable order to his remaining 4 Allied captains: disperse eastward. Independent course to Novaya Zemlya. The group splintered instantly. The SS Ocean Freedom, laden with irreplaceable railway equipment, turned north, hoping to use the deep ice pack as a shield. The Sutton continued her easterly course, aiming for the relative safety of Soviet waters. The next 48 hours saw the elimination of the rest of the heroic refusal. The Ocean Freedom was found crushed between 2 massive ice floes, a fate as deadly as any German torpedo, and sunk. 2 other vessels were successfully torpedoed and sunk by U-boats on July 11th. However, against all odds, 2 ships, including the SS Sutton and the Russian icebreaker-converted freighter Novaya Zemlya, successfully navigated the final 150 miles of hostile water. They arrived in the White Sea approaches on July 12th, utterly alone, the last vessels of the most heavily escorted convoy in history. The cost of WW's defiance was heavy, but the act guaranteed that a fraction of the vital American material, including tanks and crucial raw supplies, made it to the Soviet Union. This delivery, the ultimate measure of the convoy's success, stood in stark relief against the staggering casualty count. The arrival of the first surviving ships in Archangel and Murmansk in mid-July was met not with celebration, but with a palpable sense of shock and bewilderment. When the SS Sutton finally docked, her decks littered with empty shell casings and painted with the grime of the ordeal, Captain WW delivered his operational report. The tally was rapidly confirmed by the incoming reports from the few other survivors that had crept into port, often months later. Out of the original 35 merchant ships, 24 had been sunk. The losses represented over $150 million in 1942 USD worth of cargo, including 430 tanks, 210 aircraft, 3,350 vehicles, and 99,316 tons of general cargo, the largest single loss of material in any convoy operation of World War II. Over 153 seamen were killed. The immediate reaction from Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin was a furious, public telegram to Winston Churchill. Stalin labeled the dispersal an act of cowardice and abandonment, claiming the British Navy had deliberately betrayed the Soviet war effort. The loss severely damaged the Allied relationship at a critical juncture in the war, sowing deep distrust regarding the commitment to the Arctic supply line. In the Admiralty War Room in London, the silence was deafening. Admiral Pound, who had made the decision based on intelligence proving to be both correct, the Tirpitz did sail, and fatally flawed, it was recalled immediately, was now confronted with the full scale of the catastrophe. The Admiralty issued a misleading press statement that attributed the disaster entirely to the extreme weight of enemy U-boat and aerial attack, carefully omitting any mention of the dispersal order or the immediate, preemptive withdrawal of the heavy escort. A secret, high-level inquiry was immediately convened by the Admiralty. The central question was the dispersal order justified by the operational intelligence available at the time? The inquiry concluded, with self-preserving ambiguity, that Admiral Pound had acted within his strategic prerogatives, prioritizing the preservation of the capital ships over the merchant fleet. However, the operational commanders at sea, including Admiral Hamilton and Commander Broom, were privately scathing, asserting that the order to scatter had been a death sentence. The true, crippling irony, that the Tirpitz had turned back hours before the final dispersal was issued, remained a guarded secret, known only to the highest echelons of the Admiralty and the Bletchley Park Decryption Unit. The convoy was not sacrificed to the enemy's strength, but to the Admiralty's paralyzing fear of it. The disaster of Convoy PQ-17 became known in naval archives as the Ghost Convoy, a reference to the large number of ships that vanished without trace and the spectral nature of the threat that caused the dispersal. Admiral Pound, haunted by the decision, remained First Sea Lord but never fully recovered his strategic nerve. He died the following year, his official legacy carefully curated to obscure the extent of his failure in the summer of 1942. Captain Andrew Wigg and the men of the surviving merchant vessels were recognized only through quiet, bureaucratic commendations. Their heroism was not officially celebrated, as their story, that the British Navy had ordered the abandonment of its own ships, was deemed too damaging to wartime morale to be publicized. Wigg's insubordination, the decision to maintain his six-ship formation, ensured that 7% of the original cargo reached its destination, a tiny triumph against monumental loss. The subsequent Arctic convoys were reorganized completely. The practice of using heavy cruiser escorts was immediately reinstated, but with far clearer, non-negotiable rules of engagement. The escort was to fight to the last ship to protect the convoy. The lessons learned from the PQ-17 disaster led directly to the more successful, better protected convoys that followed, such as PQ-18, ensuring that the supply line to the Soviet Union remained open, albeit at immense cost. The true legacy of the disaster lies not in the numbers, but in the permanent scar it left on naval doctrine. It served as a stark, permanent reminder that in war, fear, even when rooted in accurate intelligence, can be a more destructive force than the enemy's heaviest gun. The order to disperse was the ultimate act of strategic self-immolation, cementing convoy PQ-17 as the defining tragedy of the Arctic campaign, an event where the fate of the fleet was sealed not by the guns of the Tirpitz, but by the signature of a terrified admiral thousands of miles away.